over the Zoom doesn't, it just sucks for doing this kind of thing. I mean, it's good that you share your screen, but I wish we need to figure out another option.
Yes, well, StreamYard it wasn't working. It says it's now streaming on YouTube. Does that mean?
Yep, we're live on YouTube. Hello, everyone. We're live. Give us just a moment. We're doing a Zoom meeting today. My name is Jason Bosch. This is If We Were Honest. Normally, I don't use Zoom, but Allison wanted to share her her screen, and it doesn't. The other program I have doesn't allow for good screen sharing on her end. So we're going to do Zoom, and And yeah, so give us just a minute. I'm going to try to get it set up on Facebook. And I hate that we're having to do this all live, the setup, but Zoom kind of sucks for live streaming. But it'll be a great show. And thank you for joining us. And I've got Allison Mcdowell with us. Do you want to say a few words, Allison, while I'm working on this?
Sure. So I've been working on a map around Salesforce. And as many of you know who've been sort of following my work, my trajectory, I came into doing this work around education, public education, and there was sort of a model work-based career-aligned education prototype that was being framed as a progressive option called Big Picture Learning. And Salesforce had done an app for Big Picture Learning with a lot of venture capitalists that were essentially setting up apps for work-based learning, which is really strange. You wouldn't, I wouldn't suspect that people would sign their children up for an experience that would replace 2 or 3 days of their school week on an app. It's not like ordering, lunch. Should I have Chinese or Mexican for lunch? It's something much more meaningful than that. So I couldn't quite figure out what was going on with this app, and it was called InBlaze, and Salesforce helped develop it for Big Picture. And so now I'm seeing that Salesforce is involved in this vaccine credential initiative, along with major players like Oracle and Microsoft and MITRE. And that's what I noticed this week. It's been out in the public press for the last couple of weeks, but it was the first time I really had a chance to look into it. So I wanted to make a map showing the larger trajectory of Salesforce in the human capital management space and how it overlaps with the biosecurity matrix, as well as the human capital training and education matrix that will feed these hedge funds tied to the UN Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is education and training. So that's sort of the larger backstory to what I wanted to do today. But I had a nice conversation with a friend who's working in this space. And they suggested that given what's going on with GameStop right now and the short selling, that it would be useful to revisit some of the information as a lead in on that, to talk about the fact that these hedge funds and the idea of shorting is something that could be applied to portfolios of people.
Hey, and Allison, so I'm going to stop you. Allison, I'm going to stop you real quick because I want to get some more people on here. So I just shared the link and I just tagged you. So do you want to share the link so we can direct people over to where we're at, and then we can actually have an audience?
That would be great. Okay, 1 second.
Let me know if you see it.
Yeah, I have this.
So if you're just tuning in, we're using Zoom today, which is not my normal protocol, but it doesn't have as much functionality in terms of directing the stream and managing the stream. It's pretty limited. So this stream page that I'd set up before is
sorry, this is
and then I'll edit it, Allison. We'll trim it down and we'll make a cleaner cut. It's just the live
Sorry,
audience that'll get the messy feed.
Yeah, okay. Sorry. And wait a minute, let me just put it out on my Telegram too. And Twitter, trying to get. And I'm gonna just back it up to the one that I posted last night. Okay, all right, so that's out to my various places. Okay, I don't know how much of my screen you're seeing. Oh, it's not screen sharing yet, right? So that's good. Okay.
Yeah, in fact, I've got to give you access to screen share. And okay, now you are allowed to share your screen. And oh good, it's recording. Great. Okay, let me just do a quick introduction. For those of you who are just joining us, my name is Jason Bosch, and this is If We Were Honest. And today we're joined with Allison, who is sharing her screen. So now you can't see me, but you can hear me. So Allison called me and wanted to talk a little bit about Salesforce because she's been doing some more research about Mark Ben. Is it Ben? How do you say his name? Allison.
Benioff.
Benioff.
I say Benioff, but it may not be accurate.
Yeah. So anyway, Allison wanted to share.
Can you hear me? You know, my connection is unstable too, so I might have to just go down to my living room.
Okay. Well, I can hear you on my end, so I think we're.
You guys might have to just deal with
I can't speak for the live stream, but I hear you.
Okay. I got a notice that it was unstable, and I had that yesterday. We're getting our first snow, so who knows?
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
I'll just go to the living room. Just 1 second. I get everything set up, and then nothing works. Okay. Studio 2. All right.
Every home is a studio now.
I had better lighting, but oh well. Such is life. Okay, a little bit better.
And I'll keep track of any questions.
All right.
As you're watching this, if you have any questions for Allison, please just post them on either, well, preferably on the YouTube, but if you don't have access to that, you can post it on my page if you're friends with me or Allison. We'll try to keep track of these questions. So do you want to just, do you want to take it from there, Allison?
Jason, I can't hear you.
Oh, well,
It was shorting out on me.
Oh, I think that's a connectivity issue.
Okay.
You can just take it from there, Allison, if you want.
All right. Do you want me just to start talking again? Okay.
Yes.
Should I sort of just give the quick overview? Maybe.
Just start over in case people didn't catch it. I'm going to edit this after the fact. So, people that get the live stream know it's just a little bit rougher around the edges around. But go ahead and just start.
Are you hearing me okay? Because you're totally choppy.
I hear you just fine.
Okay. All right. Well, then I'll just run with it. So again, I was making this large map about Salesforce, and I had come into things from education. Salesforce was operating in the education space with an app for work-based learning, and then we're involved in human capital impact investing. And so I wanted to talk about that because I saw that they were also joining in this group, the Vaccine Credential Initiative. And you can see here, along with the Mayo Clinic, Microsoft, Salesforce, Oracle, and the Commons Project are part of that as well. And the Commons Project, we know that they were doing the biometric health passports. So I wanted to talk about Salesforce, but then I had a conversation with a friend who suggested that this week, given the attention that's been paid to GameStop and the idea of shorting companies and shorting funds, and that many people who weren't necessarily operating in that space, it came to such media prominence that it would be an opportunity to open up and just revisit the fact that these hedge fund interests that were controlling the markets and setting their own rules for these markets are also planning to invest in human capital bonds, and that would be securitized debt tied to privatized public services, including education, but also healthcare and other issues that I talk about quite often. So I wanted to hit that again on the intro and also make some connections, because Mark Benioff was a protege of Salesforce. He's the founder of Salesforce, was a protege of Larry Ellison. And he spent about 12 years working as a vice president, one of the youngest vice presidents at Oracle. And Oracle is also involved in the Vaccine Credential Initiative. And as I was looking into an article that I had read back several years ago, but the article actually dated to 2002, and it was a New York Times article talking about technology surveillance. And I was looking at it because it featured Gilman Louie, who was the head of Niantic, which was, well, actually he wasn't the head of it. He was the head of the In-Q-Tel, and In-Q-Tel was funding Niantic, which was launched Pokemon Go and is behind this idea of augmented reality. So I was looking at this article in 2002, and it's been really helpful to revisit since, because then the second half of the article is all about Oracle and Larry Ellison and interoperable data systems. And we know that the human capital markets run on the interoperable data. And to revisit this article, which was just, shortly, relatively after 9/11, to hear them talking about threat profiling, the population, the idea of looking at bioterrorism, the idea of the need for limiting privacy in the interests of national security, and the role of the technology interoperable data systems felt really important. So in the end of that article, and I will show that the link, but Ellison says, well, the reporter was asking about privacy, and he says, this is in 2002, in 20 years, there'll be a master database, and it will be run by Oracle, and they will track everything. So I think it's worthwhile looking at Benioff, his connections to Larry Ellison, and what this means for this vaccine credential, not just for our mobility in the world, but also for what it would mean for us as education and healthcare. So that's sort of the intro slide. I won't go into detail on the GameStop situation. Obviously, it's getting a huge amount of media attention. As my friend Joseph says, we are in the game. We are all in the game. So it's very interesting that the focus of this is on GameStop. I don't think that the narrative, the David and Goliath narrative that is being spun, is necessarily a narrative that is in the long run going to be in the interest of the regular people and the masses. It is being spun for a reason. And my sense is they're interested in maybe expanding people's use of retail, these apps, these trading apps, and for us to believe that some way there is a way for us to win in their game, the game of the corporate elite, the Davos elite, but there really is no way to win in their game. And they will lead you to believe that. And that is what I think is happening right now. But that said, for the past year, I've been pointing people to the movie The Big Short and saying, you know how they securitized mortgage debt and traded it as gambling? And then the people that really made the most money were the ones who shorted the economy, shorted the housing market. Those were the people who were in a position to make tons of money. Go watch that movie and you will better understand that this is a huge game and that it is being controlled by powerful interests. So in that respect, I think it's very useful to understand the GameStop situation and the shorting, and the fact that more and more people, they don't have to look all the way back to the mortgage crisis to understand the idea of short selling, but it's right here and now. This is a gentleman, his name is Kevin Werbach. He is based in Philadelphia at Wharton, which is the business school of the University of Pennsylvania. Judith Rodin, the former president of the University of Pennsylvania, created these global human impact markets tied to financialization of life and nature. And his specialty is in gamification and blockchain. And so Kevin Werbach, in one of his speeches, said that it's all about the game, that you do not necessarily know the rules of this game. that you are just responding. You don't necessarily know the rules. And ultimately, the best position is to be the designer in the game and to be the one that makes the rules. So we can see how that played out with the fact that as the short sales, the people had placed their bets, and then the individuals from Reddit were sort of propping up the share price, that then the global marketeers intervened and halted their ability to buy more of that stock, that they could sell it, but they couldn't buy it. So the rules of the game changed arbitrarily. And that many times when I try to explain to people what's happening in human capital finance, they don't quite get it. They said it doesn't really make sense. And what I keep saying is it's a game. They make the rules up as they go along to suit powerful players and powerful interests. And the GameStop short sales is an indication of that. It's their game. They're the ones in charge, and they can make the rules up as they go along. These are the individuals in the space who are making up the games. This is what connects the biosecurity state to the hedge funds, to the investment markets in impact, the environmental social governance investing that is going to move forward under the guise of sustainable and inclusive capitalism. This is Tom Ridge. So the first, head of the Department of Homeland Security. He has direct ties to 9/11, right? This is the aftermath. I made a spreadsheet several years ago. I went up against our superintendent, who was part of Tom Ridge's venture merchant bank fund called Ridge Lane. R. Brad Lane is the other individual. And they created this merchant bank to facilitate the social impact goals that are coming. And it's a connection of global finance, accounting, military, education, policymakers, and all sorts of individuals. And it is their game. These are the things that they're investing in. Information technology, sustainability, read these sustainable development goals tracked with Internet of Things sensors, education, also training, and real estate. So they're looking to control the world through these investment sectors and guide how we work within it as human beings. And they have rotating pictures in their backdrop. Some of them are of San Francisco, which is where Salesforce is embedded. Some of this is, of course, Lower Manhattan. And as we look at this COVID credentialing initiative, New York State is up against potentially a proposed, Cuomo is seeking out a vaccine mandate for the entire state. And that is to deliver the state of New York, not just New York City, but the entire state into as a trophy to the hedge funds and the merchant banks who are doing these investments. The game that we are in is an augmented reality game. And as I mentioned before, Niantic, Gilman Louie was connected. He was funding Niantic through In-Q-Tel, which is the venture capital arm of the CIA. Pokemon Go was this early phase. Isn't this fun? It's a game. Life is a game. They're not going to tell you that it's backed by the CIA. They're connected with this Augmenting Cities program that, again, is like a playful path to community. And that is the branding. Again, they're not telling you that it's backed by the CIA and state surveillance. Michael Crow is the founding board chair of In-Q-Tel and is part of this whole program and is an advisor to Ridge Lane Merchant Bank as well. So this is the backdrop of Larry Ellison and Oracle. So the first client of his was the CIA. And what's really important and what didn't really sink into me until today when I went back and I reread this article was that it was the first relational database. And as I'll mention later, these impact markets rely on the concept of a cost offset. And so the idea of interoperable data and predictive profiling is central to everything. So his company dates back to 1979. Again, its origins were with the federal government, with the intelligence agency, and it was about connecting related information. Sorry, my notifications keep coming up. So Kevin Werbach, he's the gamification guy. He's also specializing in blockchain. Blockchain is going to be what will enable a citizen's interaction with their government through e-government solutionism to be kept in a blockchain, a digital identity system, which has been developed by the World Wide Web Consortium and Tim Berners-Lee, and that is the foundation of all of the impact investing that will come, is the need for the interoperable data. So Kevin Ware back at Penn, who knows about the gamification, is connected to that. Game theory is central to how the hedge funds operate. So Gilman Louie, who was the head of In-Q-Tel, he came actually out of Hasbro, so a gaming company. Before Hasbro, he was involved with a flight simulation game. And then he segued to Hasbro, and then he segued to leading the venture capital arm of the CIA in In-Q-Tel. And they said that he was attractive. He was an attractive candidate for this new job. He was the first one because of his computer game background, and that he looks at the world as a system, as a big game. So the gamification is key in the shorting. So this is an article from Forbes magazine from today, actually, where unlike many of the other media things that are setting this as David and Goliath, they're saying that the people who are making the short bets on companies like GameStop, they're the good guys. They're actually the good guys because they are culling the weak. And somebody has to cull the weak. Somebody has to be the wolf to take down, the sick antelope. So, if we didn't have the short sales, we might still be stuck with a blockbuster video. That innovation and technological systems are driven by those who take the big risk and try to bring down weak companies. This is further down in the article, and he's talking about, Borders versus Amazon, and that Amazon is what represents the future. And gosh, where would we be if someone didn't short those other companies and put them out of their misery so that now we can have our world run by Amazon? Okay, so that is what we're talking about. And these are individuals who think that is a good social undertaking to take out the weak. But my point being, and these are some articles I wrote in 2019, what I'm seeing with these human capital markets is the weak are not simply going to be maybe companies that have aging brand promises that are no longer relevant for today's society of consolidated power and control, but these could also be children and homeless people and people who are trying to navigate the social welfare system, because it is that debt that is going to be securitized, and that the intent behind many of the global elite who are in the circles of Ridge Lane is that the very rich will hold portfolios of human capital. They will actually hold portfolios of people. And when I was doing my education research, there was an entity called Global Education Futures Forum, and they had a map sort of mapping out the future of education to 2035. And it's a foresight document, so it doesn't mean these are things that have happened, but they were things that were projected to happen. And one of them was the idea of a people-naire, that you would be a billionaire, but your assets would be in people. And this is all being framed as a progressive, wonderful system. But no one's actually talking about, once you securitize people as debt commodities, that someone is going to short them. And so this week in particular, with everyone's attention on what happened to GameStop, and then what happened with the response to that, and ultimately we will see how it plays out. I mean, I want to emphasize that game, the day trading game, the options game, is not a sustainable game, and that really we are in our current situation because of the debt finance industry, and I call them militarized hedge funds, that there isn't any long-term winning in that game. So I want to emphasize that. But while we have people's attention, I want to point out that these human capital futures programs are coming online. And this is a document I've shared before, but this is sort of a smoking gun from 2012. Social impact bonds to finance early childhood education. And the new incoming Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, has been an advocate of expanding universal pre-K. But are we going to do it this way with social impact finance? Because the goal of that is to consolidate the debt as asset-backed securities. And I lay that out here at this bottom line with the arrow. they're also looking to create these blockchain systems around the unhoused. And that model is in Austin, and it is connected with ID 2020, which we know has links to the Gates Foundation and the United Nations. So are we going to short portfolios of human capital in people who are in need of housing? All of this, and this is what I want to say as this new administration is coming in, Davos is meeting, the Great Reset is rolling out, that it is all framed in progressive language, and it is all aligned to the Sustainable Development Goals through the United Nations. So whether that be addressing poverty, which is goal 1, addressing education, which is goal 4, offering health opportunities, which is goal 3, or reducing inequalities, which has everything to do with the achievement gaps and all kinds of gaps that they talk about closing gaps. It is about ESG investing. And once that welfare debt is securitized, there are interests out there to short it. And will we ever have enough people on apps trying to raise your human capital price so that someone isn't going to pull the plug and short you, whether you're a toddler or you're someone in need of housing or food assistance or addiction treatment? The people who are behind all of these human capital bonds, again, they're the people who crashed the housing market the last time. So that's Bank of America and Merrill Lynch. They're doing the pay for success finance. These were the individuals that were fined by the Justice Department $16.6 billion, which is really just a drop in the bucket to them. And this happened in 2018. So in Times Square, Ready Nation met, and they were talking about securitizing both pre-K and workforce development. And that workforce development will be tied to the Great Reset and the reskilling that will come on the heels of all of the lockdown and the economic dispossession. So they were, they're pretty out front. If you can follow the crumbs in 2018, they're taking over Times Square and telling you what the plan is. So just to revisit the Heckman equation, Jim Heckman out of the University of Chicago, the Becker-Friedman School of Economics, he developed this return on investment up to 13% on investing in children. But what they're not saying is that investment is based on data analytics tied to changing children's behaviors, and that they are going to do this on surveillance play tables. These are play tables with toys that track children's social interactions and score them, and then modify their behaviors with digital technologies, all so that they can achieve this return on investment. Career impact bonds are another model of this, and they are rolling out now. The first phase is in New Jersey. Phil Murphy is a former Goldman Sachs guy, governor of New Jersey, and he's advancing these career impact bonds, which will involve income sharing agreements that will be securitized. So they will feed you into coding, into big pharma, and into smart energy. And that's the focus of those career impact bonds, to reskill the global economy. And last year in Davos, Mark Benioff and Ivanka Trump were on a panel together to talk about reskilling billions of people. So this was the month and a half before the pandemic was declared. Let me see. Okay. The EDLI is the platform that they plan to use to securitize debt tied to income sharing agreements. Income sharing agreements is garnishing people's wages. Once they get trained, if you get a job that meets the requirements of the agreement, that your wages are garnished and will be paid back, not just your training, but potentially your social services that supported you while you were in training. And the gentleman who created EDLI, his name is Christopher Riccardi, and he worked at Merrill Lynch, and he created the collateralized debt obligations that helped crash the housing market, right? The same playbook. They're at it again. None of this is hidden when people are paying attention. So here it talks about EDLI being a marketplace, gets this seed funding 2019, right? They're teeing it all up. It's all being on the lead up to the rollout of the biosecurity state. And in this article, they talk about hoping that income sharing agreements catch on so that they will be able to package them like mortgages and student loan debt and traded as securitized assets. So it's straight up. Now, I've talked a lot in the past, and I'm not going to go into great detail here, but these human capital bonds are based, this game that they're playing is based on the premise of predictive profiling against a future negative externality, some cost. It's not unlike carbon credit trading, that we either address it now for a lesser cost, or the problem escalates and it becomes more expensive to address later. And those costs can be underemployment, unemployment, addiction, mental illness, special education, reincarceration, many different cost offsets, and academic institutions are setting up equations to justify and legitimize returns on investment tied to that. And the idea is that if you provide a solution that is evidence-based, and that's the language they use, it will reduce the need. And from this reduced need, a small part of it will be given back to the investor along with their investment. The money in the deals is not this sliver that comes out of the outcomes-based government contract agreement. That is not where the profit will be made. The profit will be made in securitizing the debt for the public programs and trading it and gambling on it in real time in sensor-based environments, which are augmented reality. And understanding that as a militarized space of global intelligence feeding signals intelligence, feeding financial markets, and also national intelligence markets and global intelligence markets, really. So again, here's Kevin Werbach. He says the rules matter and they can be surprising. So there were quite a number of people who were working on, the GameStop thing that were surprised when their apps got cut out. At this point, we shouldn't, in terms of making purchases, that they could no longer make the purchases into those to keep the share price up. We should not be, the only thing that we shouldn't be surprised. We should be clear that those in power are always going to change things up for the surprises. That in and of itself should not be a surprise. Within what is coming, people will be put on self-improvement pathways, whether that's an education self-improvement pathway or a healthcare self-improvement pathway or an addiction treatment. They call them continuum of care pathways, and the social workers and educators and healthcare professionals will start to replace the guards in this global open air prison tied to the hedge fund human capital investment game. So people are walking through. Here's the Meet Kathy, the community care coordinator. You've got your assigned pathway. Everyone can go fast or slow on their pathway, but it's not their pathway. The hedge funds, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, someone else is putting you on the pathway, and the nonprofit industrial complex is going to keep you there. And the technology systems and the surveillance systems are going to keep watch and make sure everyone is alerted on a dashboard if you stray off of the pathway. All of this is going to be tracked on the ledger, and I recommend, if people haven't seen this short video, it's by it's called Learning is Earning. It was put out by Institute for the Future, and it was from 2016. It's a short video. It's 7 minutes, and I encourage people to watch it on YouTube. Learning is Earning 2026, and they lay it all out about how your life will be lived on a ledger. It will be a blockchain ledger, and it's connected to these ID 2020 initiatives to get everyone with the biometric digital identity. This is from a little video that I did a while ago. It's called Your Permanent Record. You can look it up on my blog, Wrenching the Gears. But essentially, they need a place to collect all of the signals intelligence, all of the digital exhaust. And they're going to sell it to you that blockchain will be your liberation, blockchain privacy. And it's interesting because something that just happened in Philadelphia, we had a big blow up around the vaccine administration. They had outsourced the software platform to make an appointment to get a vaccination. The company that said it was nonprofit flipped and then became a private company. It wasn't handled well. There were concerns around data privacy and the collection of people's information when they made appointments to get vaccinations, and what the implications were for a private company having that information. And so it was a big mess. And, I was talking with some folks that just a couple days ago, and they're like, there's some other story behind this. If this is something that was really, where is this driving? Where is this driving? And several people forwarded me articles, and I finally had a chance to read through, and I said, okay, where this is driving this narrative of the botched vaccine data privacy scenario is they want everyone to beg to have a digital identity to keep their information safe and private. They don't, this guy was a setup to be the one who was like, oh, I messed up the vaccine stuff. I'm sorry. And they're like, okay, now we need a good, consistent solution. Everyone needs, a vaccine credential initiative that's on blockchain. So you have ensured safety with your data. And so that is where this is going. But what I want to emphasize is that once you have these human capital markets, MIT has Enigma as a backdoor that they can still query on encrypted data. It may not be your data, but all of these terrible processing systems and keeping people on pathways, that will still happen because they can use it for the impact markets. And so I really see the blockchain identity as a confinement enterprise. And it may be decentralized and it may be secure, but it's still ultimately this digital wallet that holds all of your assets, your education, your debt, your voting, your healthcare. It's not you controlling your data per se. I mean, it kind of is, but it is you becoming a data commodity. And ultimately, that is their game and their trap. So the interoperable data system, Data Zone is the model. It feeds into Silicon Valley Community, Regional Data Trust, and the National Interoperability Collaborative. It is this interoperable data that both comes out of the education space, but then it's also connected to the biosecurity state. And for the longest time before COVID happened, I've said this repeatedly, I thought that the lead into the biometric identity on blockchain was going to come through education transcripts. That people would be offered free college, community college, and with that, they would slide in a blockchain transcript for their education. But clearly that was not going to be a large enough market. And so now with the pandemic, and the using the backing of the national security risk assessment, they can force many, many more people to get the biometric identity through the vaccination system. But I just want to juxtapose these two things because we're moving towards this digitally twinned virtualized world of surveillance. And it's interesting because I just tried to get an image of this screenshot of Clever, which is a QR code badge that young children use in front of the camera on the laptop that they would use in school, their online learning programs, to aggregate all of the data across dozens of platforms that they use because they're too tiny to remember their password and their login, and it takes forever. So their solution is just a QR code. And this existed maybe 3 years ago. And I thought, well, we don't really even use QR codes. Those are kind of lame. They've rolled those out and they never got used. And as I opened the website, you can see from my screenshot, it says, use your camera, block or allow. That was me just visiting the website that popped up. So that's there. But then we have the QR code tied now to the COVID access. We're seeing it in other countries in terms of the contact tracing. Here, you need a QR code to go to the doctor, to get in the restaurant, to go to the grocery store. They're normalizing the QR codes with the biosecurity element. So I'm just going to walk through, before I do my map, a few things around this article. Again, this is from New York Times Magazine. It's from 2020 or 2002. And so it's 20 years back. And the reporter is talking to Larry Ellison, who is the CEO of Oracle, about databases and within the context of 9/11. And so Larry, in the lead up to this sort of quote, is talking about that the credit card companies already have interoperable data systems that they can use to threat score you in terms of retail transactions, right? Are they going to offer you credit if you go to the Gap and want to open a credit card? That they will in real time be able to sort of aggregate your data and make an informed decision. But they're bemoaning the fact that, with after 9/11, that they did not have a federal aggregated database, that it was that all of these databases were not integrated into a single national file. And he straight up says, I'll just read it. They're talking about the growth in his company, that 23% of their licensing revenue last year, so that was 2001, that the federal side of the business was going to improve after September 11th. And he's quoted as saying, how do you say this without sounding callous? In some ways, September 11th made business a little bit easier. Previous to September 11th, you pretty much had to hype the threat and the problem. So there we go. So now we're looking at a bio threat, right? And so it's not framed as bioterrorism from, some sort of outside threat force. It is ostensibly a natural occurrence, so to be said, such as it is. But all of the infrastructure around the anthrax and the bioterrorism risk is all in place. So we've got the vaccine credential initiative. This is a close-up of the map that I'm going to spend some time looking into. So we've got the vaccine credential initiative, of which Salesforce is a member. It's connected to the Commons project, which we know is advancing common pass for flying, as well as other passes for employment and healthcare access. But Oracle is part of this equation too, as well as MITRE and Microsoft and a number of others. The reporter, when he went to Oracle, and this is in 2002, he talks about getting a high-tech ID badge that could track him wherever he was in the building. Okay, so they've got the high-tech ID badges in 2002. And that their director of Homeland Security at the time said that we are going to build this bioterrorism shield. They had a product around that so that eventually everyone is going to have to participate, every hospital, every clinic, every lab. So the health status piece was part of Oracle's business program and has been for almost 20 years. And the reporter says, and this is not to Allison, but to staff in the room when he's getting this tour and learning about all their products, and I will just read this aloud. As the databases are consolidated, I ask, who should decide the proper balance between privacy and access? How do you avoid a situation in which someone could be kept off a plane because he had skipped jury duty or had an overdue parking ticket? A hush fell over the room and people looked awkwardly at their sandwiches. So I feel like in this moment, how did we get here? How are we on the verge of imposing a global biometric security apparatus? Is because for the last 20 years, people who were highly educated and well paid just decided to look at their sandwiches. A lot of people are just busy looking at their sandwiches and not looking at what's actually happening. So I'm going to go to the map now. I think I can get to that. Again, I'm going to talk about Salesforce because Mark Benioff was a protege. Mark Benioff was a protege of Allison. I think they had a hot-cold relationship. They've been corporate, they've competitors, and they've had it's gone hot and cold. But I thought that this was an interesting quote from Benioff. Or let's see, one of the books Allison urged Benioff to read was The Art of War. And that Benioff said, we believe in the art of war in that we are trying to get our competitors to attack us with angry, virulent energy. And so I sort of put that there because as we're taking on what seems like a really enormous global biosecurity apparatus run by some sort of predator energy system, I think it's very tempting to imagine that we should be fighting it with really aggressive force. And I think that if the people that we are engaging with say that they want us to attack them in that way, we should give careful thought to what that means. And so I have been trying, for lack of, I can't really even muster anything, more significant, but in small and quiet ways to contest what is rolling out from a place of, to contest the profane from a place of the sacred and from an intentional space of the heart, because that would be in opposite of what they're talking about here. So let me see. You know what? I'm gonna stop this share for a second, if that's okay, Jason, and then I need to go back into. I need to open up my. The map.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
I love that you mentioned.
Do you have any thoughts while I'm pulling the map up?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, I love that you mentioned that they want us to attack them because that seems to be what happens with a lot of even going out on the streets and protesting doesn't seem to be terribly effective. Although I will say that what they're doing in India seems to be on another level. But I think it's a little bit different than a lot of the stuff that happens here. And I think that there's a lot of internal personal work that we need to do in order to combat this and not just be so reactive, because I do think that they have, they have psychologists, and there's a lot of thought that went into controlling us and managing us, and that we should be conscious of that aspect of it, and of course the divide and conquer thing. But I appreciated that you said that.
Yeah, I mean, it is psychological. It's all very psychological, this thing that we are in. And I think knowing the media, knowing that, I think the GameStop discussion was important to go into today, because a lot of people who never really thought about shorting, like, oh, there would be investors who would want a company to fail. I mean, if you're not in that business, you wouldn't necessarily, that wouldn't be the first thing you think about. And oh, well, instead of companies, it could be children, and that's, I think that's a really compelling thing. But I do want to emphasize, it's their game.
Yeah, someone on YouTube actually asked about that. It said they asked, is there any way we can take this whole GameStop situation and turn it into something in favor of the public? And so I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but
I mean, I think the thing is, it is their game. The short trading, the day trading, the options. I often talk about the problem being the militarized hedge funds. And so I think if we can raise awareness of and some of it is signals intelligence, right? Who knows exactly what the end game is? I have some people who imagine that it's about encouraging more and more people who don't have that money to get in on the game, on the side of GameStop, and then that they will be shorted and lose a lot of money. And so ultimately, in the scheme of joining in this sort of swarm behavior and being on a team, a winning team, that people will be taken advantage of in the long and in the mid run to this, people who aren't familiar in this space and just want to feel like that they're on the right side. So I think that we need to take the lesson of what happened with GameStop, but how do you do that in the real world? How do you engage in collective organizing, in collective expressions of opposing someone's plan to ruin something, to make money off of ruining something, and put that to use. And that is what I think is.
Yeah, and I was real skeptical of it at first. I mean, on one hand, I think it's really great that people are pushing back and using kind of the system against it, but it's just a short-term thing. And ultimately, you might win a little battle here and there, but you're never going to win playing their game. And so the last show I did, we talked a lot about markets and the whole and capitalism, the whole idea of using money to make money, the whole Wall Street kind of mentality. And as far as I'm concerned, there is no solution within that framework. And even though you might win some battles here and there, I do appreciate the Salesforce thing, or I'm sorry, the GameStop situation, in that it really exposes just how rigged and just how corrupt the system is. Because whatever you do, they're gonna, I mean, these people play dirty, so you make some progress here, but they've got 2, 3, and 4 other backup plans to counter that. So
exactly. And they, I mean, a lot of these decisions are run through AI. And that's why I wanted to emphasize the idea of the augmented reality world and the signals intelligence, is because some of these, the funds aren't even really run by people anymore. Or, I mean, they're run by people who are being informed by algorithms. And if you start to imagine smart environments sending signals intelligence about populations in real time, especially if we're talking about human capital futures markets, my concern is that ultimately some of those smart devices and smart sensors will work to achieve the end they want. If the end that they want is for someone to fail, I talk a little bit about, I have terrible bus karma, public transportation karma, my kid and my husband can go out and like wait on the SEPTA bus and it'll show up in 10 minutes. And every day I go out and try to take the bus, it's on detour, or, it's, it didn't stop at that stop. And I can imagine like, what is the connection between a futures market where you need to get someone on time to get a job or to, fulfill your obligations. And then the smart environments in the AI start working against you. And, I don't think it's too far of a stretch in the next decade, given quantum computing and how far things are going with the 5G, 6G rollout, that it is not time now to be ethically contesting that scenario and saying, let's not go down that road at all.
Well, another thing too is just I think a lot about the LLC, which would, limited liability corporation. And a lot of these constructs are really about removing responsibility and liability of from people's actions. And AI is the ultimate, scapegoat, really. You can do really horrendous things. And then just, it's just the AI, there's no human being that had anything to do with that. So it removes responsibility. It allows for, really terrible things to happen without any accountability.
Yeah, well, and that's why we're seeing a shift to electronic government, and it's being framed as transparent and accountable. And we are being reframed, our citizenry is being reframed as having a digital identity. So we're a digital citizen interfacing with digital government. And all of it is data and systems analytics, which makes you sort of wonder about, if electoral politics is already pretty far gone, like what does it even mean? And it'll just be like a beauty pageant. Who stands in front of the AI? Which character gets to stand in front?
Well, the character will be AI itself. So. Several people were asking about your little CIS thing. So obviously you have a little CIS map up. You want to just give people a quick update on the little CIS situation?
Yeah, so I don't want to tell you too much about it, but I got back in. So I'm gonna try to I'm back in for the time. I'm making good use of the Wayback Machine to archive things as I go along. I archived this before we went on. So yeah, because I put a bunch of time into this. This is using up a bunch. I mean, this is really where I shine, because I've been putting education data in this thing for 3 years before the Salesforce Vaccine Credential Initiative over here got going. So when I can link in this piece of the puzzle, it really reflects in a bigger way the larger trajectory of this whole system. So maybe I'll just jump into that for a little bit. Are there other outstanding questions?
There are some other questions, but I can get to them toward the end. So yeah, just go ahead and jump back into your thing. And if you posted a question, I haven't got to it, I will get to it. And feel free to post more questions. So I'm going to mute myself.
So usually when I do a map, like just for folks who might be new to this, the color coding that I have, like I'll usually have a central feature in red, but in this, I had a couple other dots in red that I wanted to draw attention to in particular. And the size of dots, it's sort of about drawing your attention in. So red is sort of the feature item. Black are corporations. Orange are governmental bodies. Blue are people. Purple are nonprofit or types of institutions. Green are foundations, and there's a foundation, and some of the light gray are sort of vague things that might be reports or reports, laws, different things like that. This just sort of a general light gray. So here we go. Here we have Mark Benioff. Again, it's important. I think many people understand the sort of data tyranny, surveillance tyranny that California is going through. It's important to know that Mark Benioff is a close friend and the godfather of Gavin Newsom's eldest child. That was in an interview with San Jose Insider. His family came from department stores. I think they owned a local Bay Area department store chain, 2 generations worth. And so Benioff got his start working for Larry Ellison at Oracle. And he was somewhat of a wunderkind, came up under, the arm of Ellison lifted up. He was a young vice president and very effective in that role, and then went on to found his own company, Salesforce, that Ellison was involved with as a board member and seed investor for quite some time. So we have the Salesforce Benioff connection. It's also important to understand as we talk about the use of these vaccine passports and geofencing and control of people's movements, legal control of their movements in space, whether that be leaving their home, leaving the country, how far you can go from your home, whether you can go to work or not, that geofencing start to be understood in connection with immigration and border control, because the borders are about to get much, much tighter, and your border status will depend not as much, I mean, it will still exist on your citizenry, but also on your health status. So in some ways, your health status may start to supersede your citizenship status, because within your country, your ability to operate even within national borders will be determined by your health status. So the fact that Salesforce has an established relationship with Customs and Border Patrol is important to understand, and they have been targeted for rightful protest by many immigrants' rights groups. So if you're organizing around issues of immigration justice, you need to sort of widen your lens and understand how Salesforce fits into that with the Vaccine Credential Initiative. Salesforce is working on a vaccine cloud as one of its products, and they are collaborating with IBM on their digital health path. So they are providing software to IBM through the Watson Health. Now, IBM is also active in this education space and human capital management space. So again, we've got Salesforce, which is linked into education. And I had mentioned before this company called, it's an outfit called Big Picture Learning. So Big Picture Learning it goes back a long way, probably 20 years, at least maybe later to the late 90s. It's out of Rhode Island. It was funded by Bill Gates as part of his small high school initiative. It is a workforce-based aligned a work-based education program where it's a high school, and so high school students spend a good amount of their time, like 1/2 to 1/3, doing work-based placements out of school. The franchise started in Rhode Island. It has since expanded throughout the United States. Our school district in Philadelphia has a handful of Big Picture schools, and Big Picture, our school district, which is underfunded and operating in austerity for over a decade, gave them $26 million and a middle school that had been part of the 2013 school closure process by Boston Consulting Group, just handed them this school. So they're very influential. This program is framed as progressive. It's important to understand it being framed as progressive. Salesforce is connected to them because they developed an app called Emblaze. And this app did not make a lot of sense, because the idea behind this app was that if you had a job placement, you could find it on an app. These high school kids would navigate their work placement on an app. And to me, as a parent at the time of a high school age student, I thought, it's not like ordering lunch, what's a good takeout place near where I am? I'll just, order some pizza. This is a kid's learning experience. Wouldn't you expect that you would have a counselor who had vetted all of these opportunities and that would work closely with the kid and make sure that they were okay? Because I have a lot of concerns about work-based learning in terms of child labor. And I think many people who've worked in spaces that have had interns realize it's a lot of work being the host of an intern and providing them a quality experience. Interns are a lot of work. So you actually have to be prepared to give them an experience that they will benefit from. And a lot of places aren't really prepared to do that. So you've got children, you have the potential for them being taken advantage of as free labor. And then you also have issues of, no predation. You don't know exactly, as a parent of a child, when my child was in elementary school, we had to have all these FBI fingerprint clearances and things just to even go into our child's classroom to help with reading group. And now this model is that you're just going to send kids out into the world into sort of work-based learning places, just out. And, I'm sure that there probably are some clearances, but not everybody in a company is going to get a clearance for this work-based learning program. And so what are these ethical implications if we're shifting to a model where kids are mostly not in a school environment, in a work-based learning environment? Like, what are those protections? And then for me, within the background of all of that going on, I thought, an app? Why in the world are you doing an app? And this app was backed by Ted Dintersmith, who's very active in alternative education spaces and who is a venture capitalist working with Tom Vander Ark. So this app was hanging out around for a while, and I couldn't quite figure out why this app was significant. Well, meanwhile, fast forward a few years. So big picture learning has expanded internationally. In fact, the first social impact bond for education is being rolled out with big picture in the United Kingdom, in Doncaster. So Doncaster, it was a program for, I think, alternative youth. That's the first social impact bond there for education. The UK has many other social impact bonds, but this was the first education one. So we have big picture connected to the human capital bond impact space. They also set up a program in Australia. So this program was in New South Wales. Now, New South Wales, if you sort of pull back the lens and look at what's going on in New South Wales, they are going into all sorts of e-government. They were pursuing digital driver's licenses, which we're hearing more and more about. They too are doing social impact bonds, not necessarily with big picture, but they're in the social impact bond space. They were working on social impact bonds with the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, which I understand from a friend has been involved in some sort of fraudulent, problematic activities. The Commonwealth Bank of Australia has been partnered with the World Bank and the Sydney Innovation Lab. They have a Sydney Innovation Lab that is working on specifically on blockchain to develop something called the Bond Eye. And so the first bond on blockchain was developed by Commonwealth Bank of Australia and the World Bank in Australia, and it was connected to the New South Wales Treasury Corporation. Okay, so the Australia piece that we have is we have digital government, digital identity. Of course, we know that the lockdowns have been incredibly aggressive in Australia, and Australia is one of the 10 digital nations, and they're doing these blockchain impact bonds with the World Bank and in the same region that Big Picture is operating. And the World Bank is tracking education systems through something called SABRE, the Systems Approach for Better Education Results. And remember back to that quote from Gilman Louie that like he understands the world as a game and it's about systems engineering. So there's systems engineering, the signals intelligence for education, which is connected through UNESCO. And UNESCO is doing mobile learning with artificial intelligence. They have a global education data portal. And a lot of what's coming with this mobile learning, which they are specifically targeting not just, the United States, the UK, Australia, Canada, but they're also targeting the global South. They're targeting Africa and India for these private schools where education is delivered on a tablet for a fee. All of this is about consuming digital content. And some of that consumption being tracked is behavior is being tracked against it. Your biometrics in terms of how you engage with this online content. And this online content includes open education resources. That's what comes up with playlist education, personalized education, they call it, with AI, that children are being fed. Again, picture a pathway, picture the, Kathy, the community care coordinator, puts you on a pathway and you go under the banner and ding, someone gets paid, an ed tech company gets paid, an impact investor gets paid. These open education resources are put in someone's learning locker through a technology called XAPI. And that was developed by Problem Solutions. That is a military technology. And it's about feeding the results of people's interaction with digital technology into a learning locker so that they can be triaged as human capital. And open education resources also include augmented and virtual reality and behavior tracking off of that. Your interactions in augmented reality space feed into XAPI, and we are seeing a movement towards apprenticeships, I will put that in air quotes, that are linked to virtual reality, that people will be practicing apprenticeship trades in virtual reality headsets. And I realized this a while ago because I was doing work in North Dakota. The North Dakota education system was being taken over. Doug Burgum, who was the governor at the time, was a former Microsoft. He sold his accounting firm to Microsoft. And so he had those Microsoft ties. And I thought, well, what does badge-based learning, project-based learning ecosystems look like in a small town in North Dakota? Because I'm in a city of Philadelphia, and I can imagine big picture having a lot of interesting possibilities if you had the right protections in place for kids to do work-based learning. But what does it look like in a lot of these small towns? I couldn't picture it. And it's going to come through a virtual reality headset. So all of this, if you understand that it's feeding through, it's aligned to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, feeding through the data portals into these systems, the systems analytics, ultimately to back blockchain bonds. And there, I believe that there will be the intersection of social impact bonds with the blockchain bonds. And at the time, pre-COVID, I was pretty confident that it was going to happen through big picture with a big picture social impact bond on blockchain tied to badges and human capital investment in Australia. So clearly I was wrong about that because I did not forecast global health biosecurity setup, but that is the backdrop of Salesforce in emblazoned big picture, right? It's not just an app. It's not just an app. You need to understand it against the backdrop of global financial markets and the United Nations. And I will say the other piece of this, Lumina Foundation is a major investor in human capital and creating the personalized playlist competency-based education stackable credential scenario. They gave a grant to Big Picture Learning. They're connected to the National Center on Education and the Economy. I will say for people who have been in the education space much longer than myself, many of who are tracking Common Core and standardized education, it's important to understand that this really builds off of work that was started by Mark Tucker in alignment with the Carnegie Corporation, all the way back at least to the late 1990s. And he outlined in his Dear Hillary letter, which, bless the conservatives, because they were on it at the time. They really called it. This letter from Mark Tucker to Hillary Clinton when the Clintons came into office essentially laid out what we're seeing now, which is a global apprenticeship program to a planned economy. But the thing is this economy is being planned by IBM and Salesforce and Oracle. It is not being planned by regular people to their benefit. It is being planned by the global elite to benefit the global elite and this AI planetary computer system. So the restructuring of education, the National Center on Education and the Economy is based in Rochester, again, New York State. Cuomo really wants to get those vaccine tracking systems in place in New York State. Mark Tucker, he spent his whole career working this out, and he's recently replaced by Anthony McKay, or Tony McKay, who's out of Australia. Okay, so we have this direct connection between this long trajectory of restructuring education. This National Alliance for Restructuring Education came out of the National Center on Education and the Economy, and that was lobbied by Apple back in the day, the Apple education system, and it is going to feed this badge-based workforce development economy. Mark Tucker is out. Anthony McCain of Australia is now in. We know Australia is very much on the leading edge of these digital data analytics and human capital. Tony McKay is also connected in the United Kingdom to something called the Innovation Unit, which is backing a lot of the innovative, disruptive digital systems. The outcomes-based social enterprise. It's a consultancy that feeds into this global education leader partnership. And this is 12 countries that are collaborating on remaking education as a badge-based program that will feed into the OER, personalized learning, data analytics. Oh, you know what? I'm realizing, you can just hold on a second. I'm gonna go back up to my other office because my battery is about to die. And I think my connection, and we'll try and see if it's stable up there. I'm really sorry. Oh, 1 second. Can you guys still hear me? Can you give me a thumbs up, Jason?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, all right, great. All right, sorry, I ran down the battery. So I'm just moving on. Let me see, let me try to move down a little bit. My map is so big, it's hard to get it all in. It's, once you get it, okay. Okay, there we go. So here's the top of the map. We're investing in the human capital. I'm trying to get it. I'm sorry. This is not the easiest interface. Let me see. Okay. All right. All right, there we go. All right, so we've got the Lumina Foundation. When I came back from South Dakota, I stopped in Indianapolis to sage them up a pretty good bit. So I saged the Lumina Foundation. They're connected to many, many things, including this credential engine. So the idea is that these open education resources, your demonstrations of skill with wearable technology or virtual apprenticeships, they all go into your learning locker with XAPI, and they've got these talent hubs. So remember, your vaccine passport is very likely going to be layered with all linked into your learning education system, because they want all of that for the data analytics. The ACT, they have workplace credentials. The ACT has really been pushing social emotional behavior tracking too, because if you are doing gig economy work in a haptic suit, they want to know your reputation and your behaviors as well. So this is where Lumina is connecting. They're also connecting to, they're part of a venture program with Robin Hood Foundation, which was doing all of the equations tied to social service investment and wraparound services in the Harlem Children's Zone. So Robin Hood Foundation was backing those equations with Stanley Druckenmiller and Jeffrey Canada. They've got an arrangement with Salesforce and Lumina to do their own impact investing. And again, we're talking Robin Hood Foundation is Paul Tudor Jones in Connecticut, Tudor Investments, and then he actually seed funded the Investing in Kids Working Group, which is the pre-K space. Now, it's important to note that Paul Tudor Jones, even though he's a New York hedge fund, it's actually based out of Connecticut. Like, his influence is big into New York City, but he's based in Connecticut. And Ray Dalio is another hedge fund, the largest hedge fund investor that was running the UN Pension Fund. And I mentioned this on an interview with Sakia earlier this week. But it's significant that the new incoming Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, is coming out of Connecticut. He's coming out of the space with these hedge funds who know what the game is in terms of human capital investing and badges. Lumina is also connected to this education design lab, where they're remaking education again for skills badging, and they want a profile of the 21st century learner. They really want to engineer, to systems engineer their quote unquote talent, their human capital talent, perhaps not to actually have the talent accomplish their tasks and their work, but actually to gamble on them as they go along the pathway that is assigned to them in terms of their talent development. The badges are connected to IMF's Global Learning Consortium, and that goes way back. And I encourage people to go to their website and see all the partners, hundreds, like many four-year institutions, higher education, but all the way down, because the idea is they're going to totally unbundle all of those institutions into simply lifelong learning skills acquisition that can be gambled on. So they have the Open Badges Working Group over here. Now, I know a lot of people are really sad, post, I think they were, many people on the Q side were hoping that some other outcome was going to happen in the last few weeks, or that, they weren't being just led along the primrose path. But I knew last year Ivanka Trump was at this Reskilling Revolution event with Mark Benioff. So Mark Benioff is down here, and, they were at this reskilling program in Davos. They were planning on reskilling billions in January of 2020. So they knew what the plan was in terms of the reskilling. Ivanka is on what was on the American Workforce Policy Board. So these are all folks who realize that the whole global workforce needs to be reskilled for the fourth industrial revolution to build the prison planet. the cyborg prison planet. So this was all laid out. It was tied to the Markle Foundation and their Rework America and the Future of Work, and something called Skillful, which Colorado, which is at the forefront of blockchain development, and the Swiss apprenticeship model. Skillful was coming out of Colorado, but it's in many states. They actually have a whole state playbook around managing the labor market for skills, and that you will have these multiple pathways, but all the pathways are about gambling in this game theory, human capital game program. So, Ivanka is on this board. They're, connected to Skillful. The Commerce Department is the parent organization of this, and it's really interesting. So here we go. We're bumping out to Gina Raimondo here in blue. She's the governor of Rhode Island. She's moving into a position of being Secretary of Commerce. She's from Rhode Island. Well, guess where? Big picture is from Rhode Island, right? So we've got the Rhode Island connection, the e-government connection. She's a social venture capitalist, and she ran the Treasury of Rhode Island before she became governor. So she's very familiar with the investing space. They're advancing blockchain initiatives in Rhode Island. And it's kind of a perfect match when you look at it, that now you've got the workforce board, someone who's connected to Skillful, moving into a position where they're actually doing the advising on this global reskilling and the badges. So I think that's most of this. Are there any questions that you see at the moment before I keep going? Jason?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So we've got Kristen asked, have you come across SIBS related to California university students? She says at SDSU, the university is reducing the regulation. I'm guessing it's regulation, says reg for degrees, and expelling students for failing to get tested for COVID. Feels like they're shorting California. I don't know.
Well, I know that, I have a good friend who's on faculty senate in one of the systems. So I think my understanding is that there's a lot of, austerity. They're losing people. They're playing games. Newsom is at the center of all of this, right? I think the goal is that they want perpetual servitude to your credentials through these income sharing agreements. They don't actually want four-year college anymore. They say they do, because on the one hand, out of one side of their mouth, they're saying that we want college and career readiness, and we want first generation students, and we want to support college readiness. But I don't think they actually mean college in any true sense. I think that what's going to be coming is definitely a preference for work-based learning, corporate aligned training programs through these income sharing agreements, middle skills jobs, and that really a liberal arts education is only going to be accessible to the most elite. It's always been an elite enterprise, but even the state university systems, that they will be gutted and consolidated. I mentioned, this is in California, but Connecticut, they were talking about sort of consolidating and standardizing all of their community colleges to be essentially sort of the same. And I don't know, we'll have to see how it plays out in California. Clearly, it's the Democratic governors right now who are in the lead on imposing these systems, because really the human capital markets rely on the idea of a social safety net, and that the government has that level of control, and they're the ones pushing the vaccine passports. So it's the New York and it's the California. I wish I had a better answer, but I would be interested maybe in, finding out more about what it's like on the, it seems like they're trying to get rid of them. To me.
And this question might actually be to another commenter on the thread. So apologies if it is, but it said, how would you invest in seed since Monopoly own all the patents, literal same kind of market capture as Facebook? So I think that might have been directed to someone else.
Meaning like agricultural? Or?
Yeah, it sounds like they were asking about how would you invest in seeds, but that may have been something that was on the thread. So, but I just saw that it was a question, so I grabbed it.
I think clearly people's ability to exist outside the reach of this And this is why I get so frustrated when people talk about the partisanship aspect or the country-based, is that this is global. This is a global program, and the tentacles spread so far. And I got a little bit frustrated because I was having a down day a couple of days ago, and somebody piped up like, "Just get busy, lobbying your county officials." And I'm like, oh, if you see these maps, like, and plus in Philadelphia, they're all sold out, even the ones that are ostensibly our friends, like for the most part. So I was a bit off put because I'm like, clearly you're not looking at my maps. Like, you can't vote these people out. Nobody voted them in. And how do you vote out World Bank blockchain bonds? Other than trying to educate people about what's going on. But I think that agricultural food access is huge, and they're trying to close in on it. I mean, I did a talk with Sergi before about precision agriculture and nanotech and poisoning the planet. And I don't have the answer in my pocket. I mean, I can, but I think being able to clearly articulate the problem goes a long way.
I think it's critical. And I've had this over the years, even, where people are just like, we just got to do something. And I'm like, and I remember someone, back when Bush was in power, like, we need a revolution. And I'm like, we don't need a revolution right now, because people don't even understand the problem. And if you don't understand the problem, you're going to fall into the same traps, or you're going to direct your energy in the wrong place. And so, yeah, even though we're under this pressure and we're like, oh my God, we got to do something, we also have to like pull back and then like be measured about it and do the research like what you're doing. I know like the Greater Reset, and I agree with and appreciate a lot of the stuff they're doing. But at the same time, you have to really understand what the problem is and where the problem lies. Or if people that are looking at this through like the political lens, they're like, oh, like some people are like, oh, it's China or it's Russia or whatever, recognizing that this thing, the nation states are not as relevant as they were. It's like those are almost stories for the public to consume, it seems to me. That to really understand power in 2021 means stepping outside of these historical frameworks that we've, largely have been constructed for us, that I think intentionally prevent us from getting together and actually addressing the root of it. I'll go through the last one here that I have. Nicole says, I have friends that help refugees at the border here in San Diego. What does that mean for their future work? So in terms of how are refugees going to be incorporated into this? And do you want to stop staring your screen for just a second while you talk? That way people can see you.
Oh, sure. Let's see. I'm not sure how I do that. Do I just hit stop or?
Yeah, there you go.
You can't see me at all?
Well, you can. You're just a little tiny box.
Oh. Do you mind? I'm afraid to lose my spot on here because it's going to be hard to get back to.
Okay, don't worry about it. It's all right. I'll put you bigger editing when I edit it later.
Bigger later. So I would say displaced people, the dispossessed people are a market. They're in fact, I was talking with a friend. We were saying that that war in particular, and economic unrest, social unrest, and war are all create people that can be processed as human capital in these markets. And so I think in some ways, the globalization, there are people who, in this country who imagine that the globalists, that we need to fight this with nationalism. And they're not understanding that the future of work is a haptic suit and remote robotics and these other things that are planned, unless we refuse it. But that's as they imagine it, that is the future of work. And in that way, the immigration won't really matter for that. We won't have protections for that. No one's going to protect us from that part of things. So we really need to have global solidarity. I don't know to what extent borders are going to matter as much. I mean, they may be controlling borders for geopolitical reasons, to create war, to create impact markets, to fight things out. But I can fully imagine being more gentle about immigration and then incorporating people into these human capital investment pipelines. And so in some ways, if people are perceived of as fixable within the system, if they will get on a pathway and do what they're told, and be a good impact commodity, that those people will be very attractive. Now, I think that people's life opportunities are going to be constrained because the AI will assign you a path. It's sort of like those dystopian novels. There will be sort of an effective technological caste system. And whereas you may have basic needs met, you're not going to be able to get off your path and onto a path that's going to take you to better opportunity per se. I think that is how it's going to happen. They've already piloted a lot of these technologies on refugees. So the Syrian refugee population, they were the model for the United Nations biometric retinal scan food payment system. There was housing for them that was attached to a retinal scan and tracking system. Their children were being targeted for education online with tablets by IBM. And even Paul Romer, who was out of NYU, although he may have walked it back, was talking about the creation of charter cities. We imagine, those of us in education space thinking about charter schools, imagine a whole charter city that sort of exists in a state of corporate exception that corporations can just run like Alphabet, and that you could do one of those for refugees, dispossessed people, and just contain them in a charter city. And my expectation would be that they would code the digital jail. And that many people who have been sold on STEM careers, they're not realizing that the vast majority of this work is like peace industrial work, training, labeling photos for autonomous vehicle training, like doing very basic labeling work. And when I was doing my research around Santa Clara, there was a professor with their social impact lab there at Santa Clara University. And she had come out of Hewlett Packard, and she ran a philanthropy in India and actually expanded into New Orleans, where they just had women and low-income women and children coding photos for AI, and that was her social justice enterprise. So I think that's what it's going to look like.
Great.
So should I go back to the map, Jason?
Yeah. Go ahead and continue on.
Okay. So I'll just, Salesforce has its own, this venture fund, Salesforce Ventures, that's part of the human capital investing. And I just want to point out these 4 little black dots here. Torchlight, these are their investments. Torchlight is on-demand freelance marketing talent sourcing. So that's the AI on-demand talent, the TaskRabbit economy. They have Biometrics, which is AI neuroscience software to hire people. So that's gamified hiring. They have TechC, which is augmented reality customer support. And they have Guild Education. And I'm seeing a lot more language around guilds. So this sort of feudalism coming is more online degrees offered through employers like Starbucks. So you can see the sorts of things that they're investing in. Salesforce was also a funder of something called Social Suite, which is these data analytics dashboards that drive the human capital markets. A partner with Social Suite is the IXO Foundation, based out of Switzerland, again, the blockchain corridor. And they're the ones who essentially work to set up Ampli, the pre-K blockchain identity app. They ran a social impact bond workshop in Switzerland. That was in 2018 with UBS Bank, these Swiss banking interests. And again, you've got Switzerland, you've got the United Nations and the banking systems and CERN and these computing systems. Tim Berners-Lee came out of CERN. And one of the attendees there, his name was Tat Lam. He was out of Hong Kong, but trained also at Columbia and one of the schools in the UK. I don't think it was, maybe University College London. And he's an entrepreneur in blockchain and social impact. So he's created something called the Shanzai City or the IO2 Foundation in partnership with IXO. They have a lab where they're doing impact tokens. So doing last mile verification with video and facial recognition to trigger blockchain smart contracts. They're working with Grameen Bank, which is a microfinance bank. They're working on pay for success smart scholarships. So encourage people who are working in the space of school choice or homeschooling or micro schooling or pod schooling to understand that this idea of smart scholarships, especially for children who are low income, global South, at-risk opportunity kids, those are going to be human capital impact markets tied to blockchain. The pilot program that Shanzai City did with blockchain verification with the iPads and the facial recognition, this was part of a home visit program. The home visit programs are getting their return on investment. They're 7 to 13% based on Jim Heckman's equation at the University of Chicago. The mayor of Boa Vista was at that Ready Nation event where I showed the Times Square billboard and the NASDAQ bell. The mayor of Boa Vista was there. They're using facial recognition, tracking home visits in people's homes in Brazil. It's a very rural area. So this is being done through the satellite systems, and it's part of these smart social impact bonds. And again, I mentioned Amply, which was the pre-K blockchain identity app in Cape Town, South Africa. And that is a paper on that was written out of the New York University GovLab. NYU GovLab is working with MacArthur and Google on open government, e-government solutions, data-driven government. And so NYU, like if you take a minute just to look at the scope of this, you've got Salesforce, you've got a Swiss entity working on blockchain, then you have someone in Hong Kong, you have Brazil, and then you have South Africa, and then you have Manhattan. And so this all in this one sort of small space is how do you make a lot of money managing the poor as data for financial markets. And I will just point out here that Social Suite, one of the partners, and I believe it's not in the United States, it's in Canada and maybe Australia, but the YMCA is one of the entities using these dashboard systems that Social Suite developed. And I have seen in the United States here, the community school model and the United Way have worked very hard to set up data sharing agreements between community partners and schools for social services, for online learning, for blended learning, all ostensibly, and much of which some of it is out of school time, after school care, summer school care, none of which sounds particularly nefarious unless you understand this much larger end game. And, I know of people who are paying $1,000 a month to send their children to online school at the YMCA right now because their public schools that they pay tax dollars for are not functioning. So they're paying their taxes, and then they're also paying the YMCA to do online school with their kids, knowing that the end game is that all of the data analytics for the social welfare state are going to be fed into these dashboards like Social Suite and tied into blockchain. It's pretty intense. So let me see. I'm going to just move to the bottom of the screen.
And I'll just chime in real quick here is you mentioned the Grameen Bank and I have the book here, Muhammad Yunus, and he's someone that a lot of people on the left have hailed as being this great person in terms of helping the poor. And the Grameen Bank actually won the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize. But what they're doing is he's the one that really launched the whole micro lending to poor people, basically like scaling. They talk about scaling up, they're scaling down, but it's still the same system. It's just a way to pull poor people into that horrible system. So yeah, if you look up Muhammad Yunus, and it's interesting because I met a woman once, and she started telling me what she does, and I told her what I do, and then I started to kind of. She said that she was real involved with the micro lending and investing money in that whole program because they get, they basically use like well-intentioned liberal money in America to lend to these poor people, and they really are really proud of the fact that there's a really high payback rate. The poor people actually pay back their loans, and
wow.
Actually even better than even over here, like even people that are doing
yeah, because they're stuck in the game, the rich people's game.
Right, but so there's an honor on their part.
Predatory.
Yeah, but it's a predatory thing. And so I was trying to explain to this lady some of the problems with it, trying to be very sensitive about the fact that she was involved with that. And she just shut down. She got angry, and it was actually at a laundromat, and she stormed out. And I was just like, wow, this is a person that really claims to care about these people. And somebody presents evidence that, hey, maybe this isn't the best approach, to dealing with that. People are very defensive about about what they're doing, especially if they feel like they're doing good. And I get it. People are, they want to do something, and they don't want to have the one thing that they're holding on to be knocked out of their hands. But but at the end of the day, it's not about you. It's not about you. It's about making the situation better for people. So anyways, I thought I'd share that story.
No, it's true. And I mean, like I said, we have this poverty committee in Philadelphia, and a little over a year ago, I went to a hearing on housing, and I said, the wealth is so concentrated right now, and it's concentrated into the hands of those hedge fund, those investors that would short people without a doubt. And no amount of making the poor behave according to whatever behavioral regulations or going on the pathway is going to redistribute that. Mm-hmm. Like fundamentally, the structure that is being set up, it isn't growing the pie, it is redirecting those resources and squeezing people for more and more and sending it upwards. And I wish I knew exactly what we would need to do to remedy that. But having Jeff Bezos or these entities like create affordable housing that you would have to have a biometric passport and follow all the rules, just like, people haven't seen Sorry to Bother You, the Boots Riley book. I'm like, that art movie, that's what's coming, these dorms with behavioral compliance in a call center, or, instead of a call center, you're working to do gene therapy testing and coding, or, cyber security on the digital jail. And, I've talked to some very smart people recently who seem to be operating in the space, and they're having second thoughts. So maybe we can get enough people who are having second thoughts, who haven't seen the big picture of, the next GameStop is a toddler, that we could stop this, because from a place of the sacred, it is morally reprehensible what's happening.
And it is totally disempowering.
So anyway, I'll just go through the last little bit of my bottom part of my map. But so if you imagine the bets are being placed on these stackable credentials, you have lifelong learning, you're on the pathway, the school as we know it has gone. And even though people might have hated school as we know it, it turns out you're doing Pokemon Go credential badging in the CIA's video game world, augmented reality. And it's all of your movements are tracked to your digital identity. So the World Wide Web Consortium has been working on these digital identity systems and credential systems for at least 10 to 15 years. And I do believe that that's what the GDPR, the privacy in Europe, was meant to advance, this idea that you will have this unified privacy situation to hold all of this data in the smart city environments and your e-government wallet. So Tim Berners-Lee was involved in that. He's connected to MIT Artificial Intelligence. He's on the faculty of the NYU GovLab, and he worked on the DataGov UK, which we know that the United Kingdom is central, in the vanguard of advancing social impact bonds through Sir Ronald Cohen and social finance. And then, he has Solid and Inrupt, which are supposed to be the new internet, right? The private internet, and it's being pitched as a good thing. But ultimately, if it's riding on blockchain digital identity and there's a backdoor for impact investing, that isn't actually going to be a good program. So when I was just working in the education space, and I had no idea that you would maybe tokenize other things than education credits, that essentially are rights and privileges as human beings, would start to be remade as tokens and blockchain smart contracts. I was really focused on the learning records. So the World Wide Web Consortium, their digital identity program, which is represented here as W3CDID, they were a partner in developing interoperable learning records with IMS Global and tied to human resources, open data standards, and these credit transparency initiatives. And you'll start to hear, I think, the blockchain transcripts are being advanced as like, so you can know that someone is legitimate, that they have the skill as professed, that they're not providing you a fake diploma. And it's so fast because it just is an app that sits on your phone and you can release the credentials as you want them. But it is about the predictive profiling and the human capital management piece. This verifiable working claims group is in alignment with the vaccine credentials. So the credentials are not just going to be education. It's going to be your health status will be another credential, just like you know, do you know how to do Excel? Check a box. Here's the token. Do you, have you had your PCR test this week or your anal swab? Check a box, yes or no. And that is what the credential will be. So the Verifiable Claims Working Group is actually part of this blockchain birth certificate program in Illinois. So I'd mentioned that before, but that's related to like Amply and the tracking people from birth on blockchain. We have other players in the Vaccine Credential Initiative. There were quite a few. There were about 10. I didn't put them all on here, but the Mayo Clinic is part of that. There was a healthcare challenge advanced by Medicaid a number of years ago in 2016. There was a request for white papers out of the federal government. The Mayo Clinic was part of this challenge around blockchain healthcare records. We see the Commons Project. I've spoken at length about them. They're backed by the Rockefeller Foundation and the World Economic Forum, Davos, about setting up the passports, Common Pass, and also passports to access work and education and real-time health data analytics, which I think will ultimately be connected to nanotech biosensors, if not presently, at least in the some near future, based on the work that DARPA is doing with Profusa and other research programs around biosensors and nanotech. Then you've got Oracle. So remember, the whole bleed in at this beginning was talking about 9/11, the rise of predictive profiling within the domestic population, the reduction about privacy, and the goal of creating the risk scoring that was happening in the MasterCard credit card spaces into the federal government. And again, when we're talking about China and social credit scoring, we did it first. Like, we were the ones who actually did it first. His interoperable data systems, again, going back to 1979. MITRE Corporation is in this mix. And I was told after I put out this map that actually there were some connections there that were linking to what happened with 9/11 and security systems and this P-Tech company. So that was interesting. I will say even more recently, they are a sponsor of Charles Lieber out of Harvard's Lieber Research Group that is doing nanotech. And of course, Charles Lieber came under fire for getting payments for work that he was doing in Wuhan in China with nanotechnology. So we have MITRE connected to that, but then they also have contracts with the Department of Homeland Security for their pandemic response plan. Go figure, right? So on the one hand, you're funding the nanotech guy who's working with China, and on the other side, you're doing the pandemic response plan. So I thought that was interesting about MITRE. And then the last bit I'm going to go into here is really looking at Microsoft. So Salesforce is part of this vaccine credential. They're in the mix with their working with IBM, but we've got Microsoft, and of course, Gates provides cover for a lot of people. I mean, how many people out there are actively thinking about Mark Benioff and Larry Ellison in the mix? Probably not a ton unless you're working in the tech space. But Microsoft is not to be discounted because these learning credentials are tied to what they have going on, which is LinkedIn. They bought LinkedIn, and they have Minecraft. So Minecraft is socializing in virtual worlds and micro virtual economies. LinkedIn will track your educational credentials, ultimately, probably on blockchain. So we have them linked, we have them connected to LinkedIn. We also see them doing work around health bots, chat bots, with assessment for COVID. So they want to have you talking to your apps and getting your voice biometrics and training those apps as well. Through their work in the video game space with Connect, the motion capture systems, and Project Natal, really working on developing with the HoloLens and the VR, the virtual reality worlds, and the push towards digital twinning, virtualization, and avatars, that people will increasingly live as avatars in virtual space through online platforms and virtual reality platforms. That they've been working with, I don't know if you say Dassault Systems, an early aviation company, satellite company, telecom company in France, on this idea of planetary computers and virtual simulations of the Earth that they will use to run their simulations and justify the climate change aspects linking to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to all of these impact market funds. So they will be running the planet. They will be running us as digital twins in the planet. And Dassault is actually working on digital twins for healthcare simulation and 3D analytics tied to education systems. So you've got virtual reality education with the OER, but then you also have, I think, health and specifically cancer care analytics, recreating people as signals intelligence, as data analytics, as DNA tracking, genomic sequencing, to almost build your digital replica under the guise of caring about you in terms of chronic illness. But it isn't ultimately that. It's about creating this society 5.0, which I've talked about in Japan, this cyborg avatar capitalism, that because of our harm to the planet, because of our harm to each other, we will just be confined in a HoloLens and then tracked and managed through digital therapeutics, through bio nanotech therapeutics, to essentially be engineered to be this cybernetic entity that the Microsofts, the Allisons of the world would want us to be, while they live out the rest of their lives on their tropical islands, you know, with no 5G or 6G at all. And Dassault is actually working with metadata on simulations connected to Moderna and the vaccines. So I hope in this bigger picture, folks might see, like here, I'm just going to zoom out, how something as small as like starting off, people might wonder, like, how do I do this work? You know, an app, an education app like in Blaze really expands out into human capital spaces, population level signals intelligence, biometric surveillance, the World Bank social impact bonds, and the biosecurity state. And that article today with Larry Ellison really talking about the aftermath of 9/11 helped me a lot, helped me understand that quite a bit, because man, it's just been in the works for a really long time, and we're reaching the end game and hoping people wake up. So I'm done with my map. Let me see if I can figure out how to turn it off. I'm not sure. Let me see. Jason, can you just make it so, because I'm a little box now and I can't figure out
hold
how
on,
to
Mike.
Anything other than a little box. Maybe it's here.
1 second. I can stop your screen share from my end.
Yeah, that would be great. This is how my filing system. I don't have anything left of Zoom other than these little boxes. Okay.
There you go. You're back. Let me see if my camera. Oh, there we go. We're back. My camera keeps turning off. My hair. I got a little hair sticking out.
Can I not share my screen?
Conscious.
Can you take? You've taken my screen off, right? Okay.
Yeah. It's just so we have a few more questions on. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm just curious if you have any thoughts or like.
Yeah, I'll go through these. I'll go through there's a couple more questions on here.
Okay.
So someone asked, robotics, what's the point? To keep us busy, to earn your daily bread? That's kind of a broad question. I'll just go through them and then let you answer.
Okay.
Is Bill Gates, why is Bill Gates buying up farmland in the US? And someone else asked, why are people selling them farmland? And then another one asked, does Leon Black's Apollo Global have a role in all this, like Blackstone? And I'm not familiar with Leon Black's Apollo Global. Are you? Has that come across your radar?
I mean, I think Apollo is in the mix. I mean, definitely BlackRock and Blackstone. I think Blackstone is more going to be controlling of the housing vouchers. As far as robotics, I just want to go back to the beginning. I mean, I don't know how all this is going to work. Maybe they can't make the robots work. I mean, I'm hoping. I think people sometimes accuse me of overestimating AI and robotics and that it's going to be some seamless, wonderful future. And I'm not saying that. I think whatever is coming is going to be lurching and ugly and unpleasant. I mean, if you live in Philadelphia or spend time in Philadelphia, you will sort of imagine like, this is not going to be some seamless, beautiful thing. It's going to be lurching and unpleasant. But the question is, can they oppose it anyway? And so if they are able to turn a lot of work into platform labor, into remote robotic labor. And again, it may take a decade, but we don't really know where the quantum computing is going and where the AI is all going in this avatar stuff. And I'm not on the inside with that. So it's hard for me to tell how much of it is BS and how much of it is accurate, but literally that's what they're imagining. We're looking at depopulation, the lockdowns, people being hungry, people committing suicide, people falling prey to illness because they're not getting their normal health care. That's happening. There's stuff happening in connection with vaccine injuries. So all of the depopulation is happening, but then you've got the rest of the people, and they have to be kept busy. And so those who imagine that there's going to be some UBI and we're all going to just be allowed to do whatever we want are sadly misguided, because it's not going to be no strings attached. And they want to keep us on the pathways so that we can't organize, so that we're alone in our VR headset, and that we can't make a different future. And while the robots are busy doing whatever it is that the robots are doing, that even if we're not allowed to do productive work, that we will be kept on a pathway to be kept busy in order to get our UBI. I believe that is the plan. Bill Gates is buying up land because he wants to control the food supply. And I think some of the people selling, it was already industrial. Our agricultural system is already highly industrialized. I think some of the big plots that he's buying actually were held by pension funds and things. So it's not like he's going necessarily to some local farmer and buying 100 acres at a time. These are larger transactions with other investment communities that are held them separate, and he's consolidating. But there is a push towards precision agriculture and nanotechnology that I believe ultimately will be advancing this idea that humans in our current form are insufficient, and that we need to avail ourselves of these disruptive technologies of the synthetic biology to become something else. But that something else is something that's being dictated by a global biosecurity state of sociopaths. So I'm not really eager to jump on the bandwagon of that. But food is a part of that, because they're already doing GMO food that has vaccines. They're doing that with tomatoes. They're doing GMO, like the next level of GMO is the full on GMO humans. Not that we may not already be there without fully realizing it yet. I have a nice talk, if you look on my YouTube channel, with Sergi, that's all about that. That came out of a question thing I did around agricultural investing with Bank of America. And so that's that. And then the last one, I forgot it was about the Apollo. I've come across Apollo several times. It's not, there's hundreds of these funds, hundreds and hundreds. I can't remember if Apollo is part of Global Silicon Valley. I'm thinking maybe it is. Every year in San Diego, Arizona State, which is Michael Crow, and Global Silicon Valley gather for this ed tech. And that actually in 2018 is where I listened to the talk where they said they were going to use EDLI, well, not EDLI, but they said they were going to securitize income sharing agreements. And so, thousands of people go to these things, thousands of people go to South by Southwest, to these conferences, to the nanotech conferences. I can't remember, is it Carrie Medier is the doctor, and she's talking about, she's like, I go to these conferences where they talk about nanorobotics and nanotech. And it's that quote about when I ask, are you not going to be able to get on the plane because you missed jury duty, and everybody stared at their sandwich. Like, we got to stop staring at our fucking sandwich. This is now, this is the vaccine credential initiative, the potential vaccine mandate for the state of New York, the putting children on blockchain and Chula Vista to go to face-to-face school. It's not far off. It's actually here. It's here.
I think I'm going to create some sandwich memes.
It's quite a thing. Why are we here? Because everybody just stared at their sandwich.
That's a good one. One thing about this whole this GameStop thing is Stephen Cohen bailed out the Melvin Capital Fund for $2.75 billion. And I remember years ago, a friend of mine telling me a similar story he heard on it was like a financial program, and they were interviewing. Something similar happened. Someone who didn't seem to have any vested interests, bailed out somebody else financially, and there didn't seem to be any logical reason for doing that. And the interviewer asked the person, why did you do this? Doesn't really serve you. And his answer was, well, we're a country club crowd. And I think that's pretty telling in terms of what we're up against, and the real connection that there is amongst this country, the country club crowd, and recognizing that all these things that are happening are not disconnected. There's not, you can't just look at this and not look at that. And that's why I appreciate you bringing in the impact investing. And I'm just stunned that more people aren't talking about this after all this time. And I really hope that more people pick up the mantle. And if you're watching this, really put pressure on those other people that are talking about the Great Reset and talking about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, to really include the impact investing piece of it, because it's massive. This part of it is massive. And anyway, so I just thought I would point that out, that whole interesting bit about, this billionaires bailing
We're
each
not
other
in their
out.
club.
It's a big club and we ain't in it.
I don't think it's a super big club.
Huh?
Well, I don't think their club is all that big. And the thing is, I think they're kind of inbred. So I think we could outsmart them.
Perhaps, but the genius of it is they have like I guess you would call them honorary members or whatever, which is the majority of people that are actually serving it based on the need for, income or whatever. And even at high level management. And I think that's really the problem, is like the real owners of it, the real controllers of it really is a small handful, but it does incorporate the whole of society, the whole of the world to a large extent. So that's the obstacle to overcome. Paul asked, is there an international social impact treaty in the works that you know of?
No, I don't know. A treaty. I mean, I don't know about a treaty. I mean, the Sustainable Development Goals provide the framework for the global impact investing. So, the Paris climate isn't exactly that. I wouldn't put it past them. I think that this thing is going to go full bore. And I'm really concerned about what's coming with the new administration, because Kamala Harris was involved in that in California. The stuff linked to, I have a blog post about the woman that she put in jail for her child being absent from school, even though her daughter was in the hospital, that those things were happening because those are impact markets and school attendance. And there's a lot tied to recidivism and her position in the justice system. Like, surely she knows about all of these things. And so we're going to have this moral reckoning of, and I always try to bring this in, but this is racialized, this is based on history, this is based on genocide, dispossession, and enslavement. And now guess what? We're all getting, like, if we don't stop it, vaccine passports. So we need to know the history, and then we need to stand together. And we very likely will need to stand together against the state, because the state right now is working on behalf of Google and Goldman Sachs and Bank of America and Merrill Lynch.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Allison.
From a place of love, just to be clear, in this present climate, from a place of love. We are the sacred up against the profane.
Yeah, well said.
Or aspiring to be anyway.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
I mean, it's hard that I have to say that, but I feel like I have to say that.
I say that again.
I just, understanding it within the trajectory of 9/11 and the profiling of people as threats, that if you were to question this as the logical conclusion of humanity is to become a cyborg impact investment, that puts you in a certain category, is worrisome. And it's worrisome, especially that there are many people out there who are so fearful that they would give up everything and any other person's right to question because of their fear is very worrying. So
yeah. Well, it's very, very slowly happening, but people are starting to push back, and not as fast and as much as I would like it to happen. But I've talked to people more recently on a private level that I was I was talking to them with the assumption that they were just buying into everything, and then found out that they actually weren't. So I think that there's a fear amongst people to speak out, but I do think that there's a lot more questioning that's going on privately, which is, I think, hopeful. And hopefully we'll just keep keep doing what you're doing, Allison, and I'll keep making my little videos, and who
Yeah.
knows.
Thank you for giving me your time. And thank you for doing the stupid Zoom format. I know you don't like it.
Yeah, I'm a
But it
lot
was
more
good for the
limited.
map.
I'm a lot more limited here.
Well,
I'll work on some. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. No, that's it. I just cut out for a minute, but I just thank you. We got our first snow here. I had someone email me and send me a beautiful picture of a maze they did in the snow, which is like this meditative walk. They plotted it all like Ariadne's something like Ned, or it was this, and they sent me a picture of it. They sent me the drawing of it, and they sent me a picture of it, and they said, this is kind of how I connect. This is how I engage. And I thought, wow, that's beautiful. I'm like, tonight we're getting our first big snow, and maybe I'll try to do that. Like, we have to each center ourselves in our space. And, I'm grateful for the community as much as this is like really hard. And I was feeling down the last couple of days trying to, just process all of this. The community is pretty wonderful. So thank you for being part of that community, Jason. I'm grateful for you.
Yeah, I'm honored. And hopefully it won't just be hopefully this will expand out more. And so on that note, if those of you who are watching, we really could use your help in pushing getting these videos out. I'm not territorial about my stuff. If you want to if you want to copy it and make your own edit or whatever, I don't really care. I mean, as long as you're not misrepresenting it, of course. But we need a community of people, and it can't, like, I think that a lot of us who are looking at this are still, we're operating in our own like bubble, and we need to figure out a way to get this out to more people. I know I talked to a lot of people about it, and it's slowly getting out there, but I think that this needs to be a central piece of the conversation about all these issues. So please help us, spread the word, and if you have ideas, reach out to me or whatever. But yeah, so thanks. All right. Well,